Order, order. We start with questions to the Deputy Foreign Secretary, Dr. Luke Evans.
Number one, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Blue Belt programme supports the protection and sustainable management of 4.3 million square kilometres of ocean around Britain's overseas territories.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Blue Belt programme, directly funded by the FCDO, is a fantastic way not only to help with climate change, but to improve our environment. But one of the biggest threats to oceans is plastics. So will the government consider strengthening the UN Global Plastics Treaty in upcoming negotiations when they take place?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. And it's interesting to note that 85% of plastic pollution in the Pacific and Indian Ocean comes from just 6 rivers. And therefore, an international treaty really matters. And the point that he makes is a very good one, and it is at the centre of the negotiations which our honourable friend for Taunton Deane, a minister at DEFRA, was talking about last week in Ottawa.
Andrew Gwynne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw the House attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. The Deputy Foreign Secretary will be aware that over 90% of Britain's biodiversity is within the overseas territories themselves, and I was very privileged last summer to visit St Helena in the Atlantic Ocean, where I was absolutely amazed by both the natural biodiversity on the island but also around the island in the seas. What more help is the British government giving to the overseas territories' governments to make sure that the biodiversity of the overseas territories can be enhanced and maintained?
Well, I'm very glad the honourable gentleman has had a chance to visit St Helena, as have I in the past, one of the most remarkable places on earth. I can tell him that on the issue of cleaning up the ocean and plastics, the UK is a founding member of the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution, which is a group of 60 countries, and their central aim is to stop plastic from flowing into the environment by 2040. These overseas territories are not suppliers of plastic, but they are receivers of a lot of it, and that is why it's so important.
Ray.
Mr. Speaker, the recent Environmental Audit Committee reports into both the Arctic and the current one into the Antarctic, both of which I chair, have called attention to the excellent Blue Belt programme and how very important it is both in the Arctic and in the Southern Ocean. One of our recommendations, however, was that that would only work properly if all of the different Arctic ministers and different departments were to get together on a reasonably regular basis to discuss it. Can the Deputy Foreign Secretary please advise whether that committee has yet met or what plans he has to call it?
No, he makes a very important point. I'm advised that the meeting is, I think, today, Mr. Speaker.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Edinburgh West have written to me concerned that the UK is delaying its ratification of the Global Ocean Treaty, which could limit human activity in what will be known as sanctuary areas to protect valuable marine life. So has the Minister made an assessment of how this could work with the Blue Belt programme to ensure our overseas territories have the highest possible protection for their water and their biodiversity?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and the government is extremely well joined up on that, a point that I was making earlier about the DEFRA Minister working closely with the Foreign Office on these matters. So I think she can reassure her constituents that this matter is very much in hand.
Stephen Hammond.
Number two, please, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the UK played a leading role in securing the passage of Security Council resolutions 2728 and 2720, which set out the urgent demand for expanded humanitarian access.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that answer? The way to a sustainable peace, as he says, is the humanitarian access. Could he please confirm what the UK government is doing? Two things. One is to ensure the full funding of UNRWA again, and secondly, what it will do to stop the Hamas terrorist group affecting the supply of aid to Palestinian citizens.
Well, he is right about the importance of aid getting in. UNRWA is a critical organisation in achieving that. He will know that we have had a chance to look at the Kelowna report. I spoke about this matter with the UN Secretary-General yesterday when I was in New York. We are waiting for the OIOS report, which we expect to hear about soon, and then we will reach our conclusions on the best way of getting aid into Gaza. But he may rest assured that we are doing everything we can to ensure that aid gets in.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next Sunday will mark 100 days since the International Court of Justice warned of a genocide in Gaza. Yet the Israeli military continue to ignore the legally binding orders of the world's highest court, continue to indiscriminately bomb Gaza and continue to block vital humanitarian aid, all whilst the UK stands by and lets the right-wing Netanyahu cabinet blatantly undermine the court's legitimacy. Mr. Speaker, when international courts are blatantly disregarded and the UN ceasefire resolutions are openly violated, can the Minister explain to me just what this means for the rules-based order he claims to uphold? Because to me, my constituents, the Palestinians and countless persecuted groups across the world, frankly, these rules are now not worth the paper they're written on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that what he says, the way he reflects on what the ICJ said, is not accurate. What the ICJ did was they called for hostage release, they called for more aid into Gaza, and for Israel not to commit acts which violate the rights of Palestinians. And the government agrees with those 3 points.
Sir Julian.
Will the Deputy Foreign Secretary take the message back to his boss that the insertion of British troops on the ground in Gaza will simply play into the hands of those who wish to further divert attention away from the existential conflict between Russia and Ukraine? And does he share my sadness that there isn't a single mention of Ukraine in any of the questions on the order paper today?
Well, my right honourable friend will know that the government is absolutely committed to doing everything it can to help Ukraine. He will have seen the announcement made by the Prime Minister last week about the increase in defence spending, and where that announcement was made, I very much hope that he will not draw any conclusions from the order paper today, but note specifically this government's driving ambition to ensure that Ukraine is successful in beating back the Russians.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The creation of a sustainable peace in the Middle East will require the establishment of a Palestinian state alongside the 1967 borders. He will know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is now implacably opposed to the creation of such a state. So can I ask, what will the UK do in order to oblige Israel to comply with the international peace process? And does he think a sustainable peace is possible as long as Mr. Netanyahu remains in power?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are many voices that are heard within Israel, but he will recognise that the predominant view of the region, of the United Nations, of regional powers and the great powers, and the view of the British government is that what is required is a two-state solution with both Palestine and Israel living behind secure borders in peace and safety.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, more than 30,000 Palestinians are dead. More than 100 Israeli hostages are still unaccounted for. And Gaza is facing famine. The war must end now with an immediate ceasefire. That needs both sides to agree. It was Hamas, not Israel, which rejected the last internationally brokered ceasefire deal. Now a new offer is on the table. Hamas have the power now to stop the fighting. Does the Minister agree with me that Hamas should accept this deal and avert a catastrophic continuation of this war?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, he makes a very good point, and although these negotiations are fluid at the moment, he is right to say that Hamas should accept the deal that has been put on the table.
SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister knows that securing a sustainable peace will require a massive aid and rebuilding programme, and that UNRWA will have and must have a crucial part to play in that. Indeed, he himself has previously acknowledged that UNRWA have a vital role to play in aid and services in Gaza. Why then, having assured this House that he would come to a decision on the future of UNRWA's funding when he received Catherine Colonna's interim report, has he sat on that report for 10 days and said absolutely nothing about restoring funding, and seems now, Mr Speaker, to be setting us up for even further delay? It's simply not good enough, Minister. So will you tell us now, Minister, when will this government make a decision on UNRWA's funding?
Well, Mr Speaker, we've been very clear that we are waiting for not one but two reports. And as I say, I discussed this matter yesterday with the UN Secretary-General. We know very well, as he does, that the assets which UNRWA has in terms of logistics, vehicles, warehouses and so forth are essential for the supply of humanitarian relief within Gaza. We are considering the matter carefully. He will also know that Britain is not currently in deficit in terms of its funding. We are fully funded at this point for UNRWA. UNRWA has also received additional resources, including private resources, as well as new governments coming in to support them. But we will consider carefully both those two reports in full, and then we will make a decision, and I will come back to the House to inform the House when that decision is reached.
Foster.
Number 3, please, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Open Doors World Watch report provides a sobering account of the extreme difficulties faced by many Christians around the world. The report notes that more than 365 million Christians face persecution each year. As my honourable friend knows, that freedom of religion and belief is a priority for the UK, and we will continue to recognise and seek to address the issues of persecution of Christians globally.
Ian Foster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. It's great to see my friend, the Honourable Member for Eastleigh, on the front bench. The 2024 World Watch List laid bare the significant persecution Christians face across the world and the increasing pressure on churches in China. During recent ministerial visits, what representations were made on this to the Chinese government, alongside highlighting other aspects of their dreadful human rights record?
Speaker, my honourable friend is always being a staunch advocate not only for the churches but all faith groups in his constituency of Torbay. It is unacceptable that Christians are persecuted simply for practising their religion, and in particular he highlights China. We remain deeply concerned about the persecutions of Christians, Muslims, Buddhists and Falun Gong practitioners. And my honourable friend knows that I myself was sanctioned by China for raising the persecution of the Uyghur Muslim. My honourable friend, the Minister for Asia, visited China last week, and she made clear our concerns about China's human rights violations.
Shannon.
Mr Speaker, thank you. Can I also thank the Minister very much for that. The Open Doors watch list, I think we're deeply indebted to them for what they do. Pakistan continues to cause concern. It certainly does for me and many others. For those who are of an Ahmadi Muslim belief, for those who are Sikhs, those who are Hindus, and those who are Christians. They cannot have the freedom of human rights. They're persecuted across all of Pakistan. How can we exert greater influence to affect change in Pakistan and make it better for people when it comes to worshipping their God as they so wish to do?
My honourable friend is already putting a lot of pressure through his vice chairmanship of the APPG for freedom of religion and belief. We took forward a bill just last week, and my co-minister Lord Ahmed met with the foreign minister Ishaq Dar just in March to discuss this particular issues that he has raised. And the former foreign secretary raised the persecution of religious communities, including recent attacks against the Christian community in the Punjab. So these conversations will continue, and the fact that we have committed to continuing the role of the freedom and religion and belief envoy will provide us with the authority to do so.
Nick Fletcher.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 4, 5 and 13 together. Tackling irregular migration is a priority for Foreign Office engagement across our overseas networks through international fora, including at the G7 and the European political community, and bilaterally.
Mick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the success of the agreement with Albania, which has considerably reduced the numbers of illegal immigrants crossing by small boats, Does the Minister believe that more of these agreements are necessary alongside our Rwanda policy?
Yes, my honourable friend makes a good point, and he will, I think, have seen that on the 17th of April we signed an agreement with Vietnam to tackle irregular migration and reduce channel crossing casualties. Vietnamese people coming across the channel has been one of the fastest rising groups in recent months.
Mr Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Recently, the Irish Taoiseach stated that he believed the increase in irregular migration to the Republic of Ireland was a direct result of the deterrent effect of our Rwanda policy. The Irish government has since made moves to try and remove those illegal migrants back to the UK. Can I ask my right honourable friend what conversations he's had with EU counterparts and Home Office colleagues about ensuring that there is no returns policy with the EU unless a reciprocal agreement is agreed?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point. What is sauce for the goose is also sauce for the gander. And the movement of asylum seekers from the UK to the Southern Irish Republic would indeed suggest that the Rwanda agreement is already having the deterrent effect we are seeking.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his answer, but I've been staying in this place and in many other places for some time that a combined effort between French and English forces would be very useful on the ground in France to stop these boats from even getting to the beaches in the first place. We have the technology and we can destroy the boats, and I don't see why we don't. Now, my right honourable friend from Gainsborough and I wish to visit Calais to meet the mayor to discuss this idea. Will my right honourable friend join us?
Well, Mr Speaker, it is an unbelievably tempting invitation from my honourable friend, but can I tell him that recently we have seen a 120% increase in French boots on the ground and a 36% reduction in the numbers coming across from last year. So French boots on the ground is, at least in part, delivering what is required.
Frederick Campbell.
Speaker, the Irish Republic's government and the Justice Minister there indicated that she believes that up to 80% or more of those who are illegally in the Republic of Ireland are coming across the land border. But that appears to have been a purely subjective figure. Has the Minister been able to establish the veracity or otherwise of such an exceptionally high figure that she has claimed is the case?
We haven't, Mr Speaker, for reasons that the honourable gentleman will understand. This is a Southern Irish Government responsibility, but no doubt the Southern Irish Government will be being pressed on this matter and in due course will deliver an answer.
Patrick Brady.
See, on one hand, he wants to improve international cooperation on tackling illegal migration, and then on the other hand, say that they're not willing to come to an agreement with the Government of Ireland or any other European countries on returns of asylum seekers.
I didn't say anything of the sort, Mr Speaker. We are working together in numerous international fora tackling this matter upstream, the Global Refugee Forum, G7, UNGA, the European Political Community Summit. Working upstream and working with others is critical to resolving this deeply disturbing problem.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The only way to stop boats at sea and illegal migration is through a structured series of cooperation with our neighbours and internationally. So I'd welcome the signing on 23rd of February of the agreement between the UK and the EU's Frontex Border Protection Service. But is it properly funded, and what mechanisms are there to review that funding as it evolves? And surely the Minister must agree with me that the best way to tackle illegal migration is to properly fund safe and legal routes. What progress is he making on a comprehensive deal to that end with our EU friends, including Ireland?
Well, Mr Speaker, we need to tackle this issue, as I think he's implying, on a whole series of different fronts. We are working upstream, as the deal with Vietnam demonstrates. Our Prime Minister has substantially repaired the relationship with France. The Calais group has met the UK-France customs partnership. We work very closely with Frontex, and there are far more officials now in Britain dealing with these cases. And as the Prime Minister has made clear, once this matter has been resolved, he is going to look at bringing in safe and legal routes from elsewhere.
Mohammed Yasser.
Number 6, please, Mr Speaker.
You're on again.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 6, 9, 14 and 20 together. We trebled our aid commitment in the past year, and we are doing all we can to get more aid to Gaza by land, air and sea.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The coroner review was given no evidence to back up claims by the Israeli government that UNRWA staff were involved in the October 7 attacks. Other countries have already restored funding for the aid agency so it can continue its work to feed the tens of thousands of people who are starving in Gaza, including innocent babies who are dying without milk. So will the minister commit refunding today, or will he continue to risk UK complicity in using famine as a weapon of war?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've set out the process by which we will judge how and when to restore funding to UNRWA. But the situation has improved in recent weeks. He will have seen that fuel for bakeries has been restored. We are pressing for the activation of the water pipeline. And over the last week, we've been averaging more than 200 trucks each day. So progress is being made, but there needs to be a lot more progress, and Britain will continue to press for it.
Leave it.
When Putin invaded Ukraine, the people of Blythe, Cramlington and Seaton Valley came together and generously gave what they could spare. With help from local companies like Moody's Logistics and Cramlington, we were able to ensure that the aid reached those who had lost their homes and their belongings. What plans does my right honourable friend's department have in place to get aid from the UK to Gaza?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the good people of Blythe, Cramlington and Seaton Valley for their generosity, and to my honourable friend for helping channel that goodwill so constructively. And his constituents will want to support reputable NGOs and charities working to support humanitarian relief in Gaza.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel has forced more than 1 million Palestinians to flee to Rafah, claiming it to be a safe zone. Yet for months, the Israeli military has been bombing Palestinians there relentlessly, and according to the UN, killing mostly women and children. Now they are planning a ground invasion that will lead to a carnage. Does the minister agree with me that President Biden could stop this with one phone call, and will he be pressing him to do that?
Well, I think President Biden has been very heavily engaged in this matter, and as she knows, both the American and British government have pressed Israel not to launch an all-out assault on Rafah for the reasons that she set out. And the Shadow Foreign Secretary rightly said that the current deal on the table he hopes that Hamas will accept, and I agree with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An Israel ground invasion in Rafah is probable within days. 1.5 million displaced Palestinians with no safe place to shelter. Children in Gaza are being starved at the fastest rate the world has ever seen. And Minister, members across this House, including myself, have come here time and time again asking us to do something, to deliver aid and push for a ceasefire. And time again, the Minister says we are trying clearly. It's not working. What will the government be doing to move the dial and stop children from dying?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she will have seen the 6th of April maritime announcement. She will know that Britain is ramping up by land, sea and air the delivery of aid. She will, I hope, be aware that we have a naval ship standing by, 9.7 million of aid and logistics equipment, and also there have been, I think, 10 airdrops already. The 11th one is expected today. 10 of those are by the Royal Air Force. So in terms of trying to move the dial, as she requests, I think the British government is doing everything it possibly could.
Get Maltos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister will know, it's not only governments and NGOs, but there are lots of charities which are supporting Palestinians across Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. I've been contacted by one such charity called ABCD, who operate a
Centre for Disabled Palestinian Children in the Nur Shams refugee camp. They tell me that their centre has been raided and destroyed not once but several times by the Israeli army, not by settlers. What more can the government do to protect the facilities and personnel of British charities operating in the Palestinian territories?
Well, he will know that we do everything we can in that respect, Mr. Speaker, but if he is able to give me some specific details about that particular charity and what has befallen them, I will look into it.
Liz?
The Prime Minister has identified getting aid in and getting hostages out as two key priorities for the UK government. Israel is facilitating aid getting into Gaza by air, land and sea. 468 trucks entered in a single day. We're seeing real progress on aid. When are we going to see progress on hostages too?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to see a breathing space so that we can get the hostages out and more aid in. The aid, in spite of what she says, the aid that is getting in at the moment is not sufficient, and that is precisely the policy of the British government, and we will continue to pursue it with all vigour.
Shadow Minister Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Colonna report makes clear that donors should have confidence in UNRWA, and given that Australia has restored funding, France has restored funding, Germany has restored funding, Sweden, Canada, Japan and Denmark have all restored funding, and with Gaza facing famine, can I ask the Deputy Foreign Secretary again, when will the government do what Labour has called for and restore full funding to UNRWA?
Well, as I've set out, Mr. Speaker, we are looking at all these reports. We will make a decision in our own time. And Britain is not fallen short in that respect because we are currently fully funded of all the earlier commitments we made. But we will look at the OIOS report. We will look at the UNRWA reaction to that. We are aware of non-traditional donors and private donations coming in. UNRWA is fully funded until the end of May, and when we reach our conclusion, I will be sure to inform the House of it.
Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, as required by the UK's robust arms export control regime, the Foreign Secretary has reviewed the most recent advice about the situation in Gaza and Israel's conduct of their military campaign. The British position with regard to export licences is unchanged, but we will keep this position under review.
Owen Thompson.
Given the very purpose of the UK's arms export licence criteria is to apply a precautionary principle over arms sales to prevent them from fuelling future atrocities, and given the extensive evidence of potential war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law in Israel, by Israel in Gaza, surely it's clear that the UK export licences system isn't working. Would the Minister agree with me and the countless Midlothian constituents who have been in touch with me that the Government should now suspend transfer of arms to Israel in order to prevent future atrocities? And doesn't he agree that UK Government policy allows for that decision to be made at the discretion of ministers outside the failed export licensing system?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our position on the arms embargo is consistent with most of our like-minded partners who have not taken any decision to suspend existing arms export licences to Israel. And it would be an odd decision for us to take when we've used our own military weaponry to defend Israel from the attacks by Iran.
Michael Ellis.
Mr. Speaker, exports are linked to law, of course, and the White House said yesterday that the International Criminal Court does not have jurisdiction over Israel because, rather like the USA, they are not signatories to the Statute of Rome, which set up the court. Over 3 years ago, the British Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, wrote an open letter saying that the UK does not accept the ICC has jurisdiction, again because of the Statute of Rome and because of the absence of sovereignty as regards the situation in the region. Can the Deputy Secretary of State, Deputy Foreign Secretary, confirm that that is still the position of His Majesty's Government?
Well, I can tell my right honourable and learned friend that we do not think that the ICC has that jurisdiction, as was set out in the letter to which he referred. But it is a matter for the ICC, ultimately, to reach a determination on that.
David Hamilton.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
The safety of our staff is paramount, and a decision was taken in November 2019 to move the last UK-based staff member in Haiti to the neighbouring Dominican Republic. The security situation since has not allowed us to consider returning permanently. We have 2 country-based staff members in Haiti's capital who we're in constant contact with. They're working from home, and there are no specific threats to them based on them working for the UK.
Fabian Hamilton.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for that answer. When Haiti's Transitional Council was sworn in last week, the ceremony was forced to change its location owing to gunfire erupting from nearby criminal gang outposts. This was a stark reminder that Haiti is a country far from political legitimacy. So what steps is the government taking to assist the Transitional Council in order to ensure that a new president is democratically elected in 2026 and that we do not see them targeted with violence in the meantime?
We're working closely with international partners, of course, the United States, Canada, and very importantly, CARICOM. And of course, we're also working incredibly hard to make sure we provide every support we can for the multinational security support mission. And the Foreign Secretary has already pledged funds for our support for that important mission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the UK's £5 million commitment towards the deployment of the multinational security support mission in Haiti? Can my honourable friend tell the House a little bit more about how that is actually working and how it's being deployed, and also expand on the discussions he's had with our friends in the Dominican Republic about their own security along the border with Haiti?
Thank my honourable friend for his question, a very important one around the Dominican Republic, and I was there at the end of March, met with President Abinader, talked about the situation, and obviously we talked about the importance of the MSS as well in that conversation. Clearly the Kenyans will need to decide how they move forward, but as has been said, the Transitional Presidential Council having been put into place is an important moment.
Can the Minister and the Moran?
Hear, 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 hear. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, half of Haiti's population is starving. Violence is rife. Dead bodies lie forgotten on the street. For too long, this crisis has been ignored. As the Minister knows, this grave situation also risks destabilising the wider Caribbean region, including our overseas territories, with the Turks and Caicos Islands less than 200 miles away. Can the Minister confirm the UK's donation to the UN fund? They missed it out of their statement, and lay out what other diplomatic support the government is offering to address this crisis.
Well done. Most importantly, beyond those other things that I've mentioned already, we're working closely with the UN Security Council, which is a vital forum here. We continue to work with like-minded countries to help with the establishment of the MSS. She also rightly highlights the importance of humanitarian support, and as one of the major donors behind the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, there's been an endorsement or authorisation of disbursement of $12 million to support those affected.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Iran's support for prescribed groups operating in Gaza, such as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, compromises our efforts towards a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Iran continues to operate well in violation of the JCPOA. Its nuclear programme is way beyond anything needed for purely peaceful processes. But it doesn't end there. It is also threatening journalists on UK streets, and its proxies in Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis continue to inflict tragedy on the region. Could I ask my right honourable friend for his assessment of the JCPOA and whether it's still fit for purpose?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point. Alongside international partners, we are prepared to use all options available to tackle the difficulties which he described, including triggering the UN snapback and ending the JCPOA if necessary.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As probably the only member who's actually lived and worked in Gaza, I have to say I've been heartbroken over the last 6 months at what I'm hearing from friends and colleagues who are there about the almost total destruction of the healthcare system and the impact of widespread starvation on their patients. Basically, With the UK having defunded UNRWA, still supplying arms to Israel and often defending Netanyahu's policies, is the Minister not anxious that the UK government is undermining international law itself?
No, Mr. Speaker, and she will have seen how, in respect of 2720 and 2728, Britain's diplomacy worked to move people into a common position. We are very clear about the importance of getting aid into Gaza and getting the hostages out, and all of British policy is bent without fear and favour to achieving that.
George Galloway.
Number 11, sir.
Mr. Speaker, we are deeply concerned about the prospect of a military offensive in Rafah. We need an immediate humanitarian pause to get aid in and hostages out, then progress towards a permanent, sustainable ceasefire.
The Foreign Secretary is fortunate to have such an able deputy, which makes it all the more difficult to understand the inherent complacency in that answer. We are hours away from a bloodbath that will make Fallujah pale into insignificance, that will be the worst bloodbath seen in the world since the Second World War. 1.6 million people, most of them women and children, are 72 hours away from a full-scale invasion. The Minister keeps saying we're going to press Israel. What are you going to do about it if it happens?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman and I first entered this House on the same day nearly 40 years ago, and it is no surprise to see him back in his place. And it has to be said that throughout that time his views have been remarkably consistent. Given the number of civilians sheltering in Rafah, it's not easy to see how such an offensive could be compliant with international humanitarian law in the current circumstances. And on his overall point, I hope he will recognise that the British government is doing everything he can to prevent the circumstances which he described.
Mark Logan.
Mr. Speaker, sustainable calm is the latest buzzword, but the fighting simply has to stop. The Palestinian President Abbas recently said in the last 2 days that in order for there to be sustainable calm or a ceasefire, the United States must give a warning to Israel. What warnings has the UK government given to Israel when it comes to a possible ground invasion in Rafah?
Well, I refer my honourable friend to the comments I made earlier in that respect, but he will know that the British government and the American government have been working in lockstep to prevent the situation which he describes.
Dame Patel.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise the distress to all those affected by international parental child abduction, in particular the children, and the primary global mechanism for dealing with international child abduction cases is the 1980 Hague Child Abduction Convention. And due to the persistent campaigning of my right honourable friend, the Foreign Office has raised this with the Polish government, including the Foreign Secretary, with his counterpart.
Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is fully cited on what is, quite frankly, one of the most tragic and appalling cases that my constituent, Mr. Tom Tulin, whose Polish ex-partner defied a family court order and took their daughter Rianne to Poland. This case has been going on for too long, for many, many years. I thank the department for the engagement they've been having. She will also know that there are hundreds of other cases specific to Poland of children being abducted. There are many cases. With the change in the Polish government at the end of last year, can I ask the Minister what further plans does she have and the government has to really give support to my constituent, because his life has been destroyed by this and it cannot go on. It is not sustainable anymore, and he's been let down by Polish court orders again and again and again.
Thank you. My right honourable friend's persistent campaigning has made sure that the case of Tom Tulin has been raised regularly with our Polish counterparts. The government has raised it many times, including on April the 9th, when the case was raised with the Justice Minister, and the Foreign Office remains committed to using every appropriate opportunity to raise issues surrounding the enforcement of the 1980 Hague Convention court orders, as well as individual cases with the Polish government. My right honourable friend will know that now that I'm taking over this brief, I am absolutely committed to ensuring that we're returning children to the parents that they have been allocated to by courts.
Deputy. Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, this year the UK will nearly double the support for people in Sudan, with £89 million in aid. This is nearly double the amount we set out at the beginning of last year, but in the last quarter we have augmented that figure as well.
Alison Thewlis.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The Sudanese city of El Fasher is the western region of Darfur's humanitarian hub, but the US ambassador to the UN has said that El Fasher is on the precipice of a large-scale massacre. What is the Minister doing to avert this impending crisis?
Well, she raises the position of Al Fasher, Mr Speaker. I specifically spoke about this with the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, yesterday. And she is absolutely right, and we are doing everything we can. As she will know, Darfur is a particular focus of the British government and indeed of Parliament through the all-party group. And through a number of mechanisms, we are doing everything we can to try and ensure that the people in Darfur are protected.
David Mundell.
Thank you. I don't know if the Deputy Foreign Secretary has had the opportunity to see the evidence that frontline aid workers gave to the International Development Committee last week. That was very traumatic evidence, but the one chink of light was the positivity to the work that the FCDO has been doing to try and continue education for children who have been displaced during this crisis. So will my right honourable friend give a commitment that that support will continue and indeed be enhanced?
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for what he has said. We are seeking to assist 500,000 children under 5 in Sudan. He will know that 8.6 million people, Mr Speaker, are displaced. 2 million have fled across borders, and 17.7 million are suffering acute food insecurity. And more widely, 730,000 Sudanese children are suffering from the deadliest form of malnutrition.
Shadow Minister Lynn Brown.
Grateful, Mr Speaker. As we know, and as has been said, right now an offensive is underway to capture El Fasher, the last remaining city in Darfur outside RSF control. The risk of massacres and rapes targeted at non-Arab communities is imminent, and I fear that it will be simply appalling in scale. All arms supply to the warring sides must stop, and we thank our tireless diplomats alongside African Security Council colleagues for Friday's statement at the UN. But what mechanisms are the government using with our partners to use every single day to build pressure for an immediate ceasefire and a sustainable peace?
Well, we very much hope, Mr Speaker, that Jeddah 3 will be the next significant opportunity to negotiate. What we require is a ceasefire with the troops returning to barracks and a political track. And when I was a few weeks ago in Adre on the Chad-Sudan border, I saw for myself the difficulties in supporting Darfur, including with food. But she may rest assured, and the House may rest assured, that Sudan is not forgotten, and Britain, as the penholder at the United Nations, is doing everything it can to help.
Fiona Bruce.
Question 16, Mr Speaker.
The UK is committed to defending freedom of religion or belief for all. We share widespread international concern about the suppression of human rights in Nicaragua, including the right to freedom of religion or belief. We continue to call in bilateral and multilateral settings for the Nicaraguan government to respect democracy and all human rights.
Fiona Bruce.
3 all-party groups, including that on international freedom of religion or belief, recently produced an inquiry report, The Silencing of Democracy in Nicaragua, outlining widespread, grave and brutal human rights violations by the regime there against journalists, academics, political opponents, religious leaders and wider civil society. Our report makes recommendations for the UK government and other states. What public steps will ministers take, both unilaterally and jointly with other countries, to challenge those violations, to support victims and survivors of them, such as Bishop Alvarez, and to call to account the Nicaraguan regime for such violations in line with our recommendations?
Very much welcome the report. It was good to meet with my honourable friend and parliamentary neighbour and respected Special Envoy on FORB to review the report. I've read it with interest and will respond to the inquiry member shortly, but she can be assured that we'll continue to call out this behaviour, this unacceptable behaviour by the regime that does not respect human rights and certainly does not respect freedom of religion or belief.
Bob Seeley.
17, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have called for an end to British citizen Jimmy Lai's prosecution in Hong Kong and for his release. The Foreign Secretary raised his case with the Chinese Foreign Minister in February, and I raised it during all my visits to Beijing and Hong Kong last week.
Bob Seeley.
Would ministers agree that this dreadful case shows the true nature of the Chinese communist regime, and can we be doing more to really get a stout defence of UK citizens throughout the world, including Vladimir Kara-Murza in Russia and Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, who are British citizens who are part of political show trials from authoritarian or fascist states? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Lai has faced multiple charges to silence and discredit him, and he has been targeted in a clear attempt to stop the peaceful exercise of his rights to freedom of expression and association. My honourable friend raises an important question around those who are dual nationals and the challenges that our consular teams have where countries do not recognise that British nationality. We will continue to champion, and we have consular teams at Jimmy Lai's trial almost every day, and will continue to provide the support we can and to his family.
Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Minister, who I know takes an interest in this particular issue very closely, had an opportunity, or any of the other Foreign Office ministers, to raise this directly with the Chinese ambassador?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have raised this issue with the Chinese ambassador, and I was able to raise this issue last week when I was in Beijing with my Foreign Minister counterpart.
Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the trial and detention of British citizen Jimmy Lai really shows the symbolism and the importance that we've got to get to grip with Hong Kongers and their rights. Could she explain, when she was in Beijing, that she was able to get the balance right between the quite legitimate trade interests, but the importance of human rights, freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression, and all those other moral and political duties which we have in foreign policy?
Mr. Speaker, I was able to meet with many different groups, from businesses to civil society to religious voices, and indeed political interlocutors last week when in Beijing and also in Hong Kong, and I raised very firmly all those areas around these issues of freedom of expression and those without fear or favour. They were robust discussions, and it's so important that we are able to engage so that we can have those conversations, and the complexity of our relationship with China and Hong Kong continues, but we will stand absolutely firm in making sure we champion and stand up for all those who defend those freedoms.
Come to Topicals with Tony Antoniat.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government continues to stand up for our values, our allies and those most in need. The Foreign Secretary attended the NATO and G7 foreign ministers' meetings and reaffirmed our unwavering commitment to Ukraine. He urged partners to increase their support in line with the Prime Minister's pledge of 2.5% of GDP for defence. I returned, Mr. Speaker, overnight from the UN in New York as part of Britain's contribution to the International Conference for Population and Development 30 and our work on Sudan and securing funding to stave off a famine in Ethiopia.
Mr. Speaker, conditions in Gaza are desperate and civilians are suffering. It's now an immense issue. The water has still not been fully switched back on and famine has taken hold. The World Food Programme reports that 90% of people in northern Gaza are living on less than a meal a day. Can he now please clearly outline what his government is doing to alleviate the threat of famine and prevent its further spread?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to make sure that the water is restored, as I set out earlier in questions today, and we are championing the provision of aid by land, sea and air. And I set out the help that we've received from the Royal Air Force in that respect. But at the end of the day, the right way to get aid into Gaza is by road, and we are pressing in every way we can to ensure that that access is restored.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And following on from the discussion about aid into Gaza, sometimes we need novel ways of thinking about doing that. So what conversations is he having with other countries and counterparts about opening a new maritime corridor if the road routes are failing?
Makes a good point, Mr. Speaker. We are working closely with a number of partner governments, including America, Cyprus and the UN. Maritime discussions include on corridor planning for the delivery of UK aid and on a package of support, including equipment and the use of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Cardigan Bay.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, last week the US Congress agreed a new $61 billion aid package for Ukraine. The bipartisan cooperation led by Mike Johnson is essential for Ukraine to continue to defend against Putin's illegal invasion. I'm proud that this House will stand united on Ukraine for as long as it takes to win. Can the Minister update the House on progress with our G7 allies to seize and repurpose frozen Russian state assets in the UK to support the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the government is seeking agreement on a way of advancing this with the G7. He's right about the mechanism, and we're doing everything we can with our allies to achieve precisely what he described.
Hamas is quite rightly an internationally prescribed organisation, yet the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which funds and supports Hamas, is not. Shouldn't it be?
Whilst the list of prescribed organisations is kept under review, we do not comment on whether any particular organisation is being considered for prescription. However, the government has taken measures to counter the threat from Iran, including sanctioning the IRGC in entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tibet is currently ranked as the least free place for civil and political rights by Freedom House alongside Syria. There are credible reports of torture, extrajudicial killings and serious restrictions on freedom of expression and the freedom of the media. And last year, 3 independent UN experts warned that almost 1 million Tibetan children are coerced into residential home system designed to systematically assimilate them to the Han culture. What diplomatic steps is the government taking to hold the Chinese government to account about these grievous violations?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government consistently raises human rights issues with China's authorities, as I did, as I mentioned, during my visit last week. We also regularly raise Tibetan multilateral fora, for example, in January at China's Universal Periodic Review and in March as part of our Item 4 statement at the UN Human Rights Council.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many people in the Aylesbury constituency are understandably concerned about the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. They condemn the appalling actions of Hamas, but at the same time want the UK to do everything possible to get more aid in. So can my right honourable friend let them know what further plans he has to provide more aid directly, especially with our friends in the region, including Egypt, Qatar and Jordan?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his thoughts and ideas for which he came and spoke to me about last week, and he was conveying the views of the mosques in Aylesbury. We are pursuing many of the ideas which he set out, as he knows, especially on meeting the evident humanitarian needs which have rightly preoccupied the House today.
Dr. Ruperhart.
Mr. Speaker, 1 month since UN Security Council Resolution 2728 passed with UK support, what is our government doing to bring about the immediate ceasefire in Gaza, compliance with international law, release of hostages and passage of aid that it calls for? What are the consequences for non-compliance apart from more death and destruction?
Well, as she knows, the UN resolution to which she referred, 2728, which was passed on the 25th of March, reflected the international consensus behind the UK's position about the importance of getting aid in and the hostages out. And that is what we're bending every sinew to achieve.
Dale Kuczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bearing in mind Lord Cameron's unique responsibility for Libya following our intervention in that country during the Arab Spring, what is the government doing to help the Libyan government to tackle the enormous fraud that is taking place from the sale of oil from the Libyan State Oil Company?
We continue to work very closely with the government in Libya, and Lord Ahmed and I keep in touch on these particular matters, and I'll update him further.
George Galloway.
Speaker, when the ICJ almost 100 days ago sent Israel for trial, plausibly on charges of genocide, the British government called it a foreign court. What attitude will the government take if, as widely reported, the British King's Counsel, Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, issues an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman is speculating in an extraordinary manner. What the court said at the time was that the hostages should be released, that there should be more aid into Gaza, and that Israel should not commit acts which violate the rights of Palestinians. That is where the court rests at this point, and we must wait for further events.
Julian Sturding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ahead of the UN General Assembly high-level meeting on AMR, does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's vital to build the political will of developed and developing countries to prioritise tackling AMR? And can I ask what discussions he's had with his counterparts coming up to this high-level meeting?
Well, he is absolutely right. An enormous amount of work is going on in respect of AMR. It's been discussed extensively this year at the United Nations. Dame Sally Davis, who leads for Britain on this, is doing a fabulous job, and Britain is committed to doing everything it can to make real progress on this vital issue.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, as of the 9th of April, 8 field hospitals are reportedly active inside the Gaza Strip, with some operating at 265% of their capacity and with a shortage of medication and supplies. So what is the UK Government doing to help facilitate medical evacuations, particularly of children?
Well, we have worked extensively with our partners in the Gulf on the issue of evacuations, and Britain is doing a great deal through our medical support for the field hospital which we have in Gaza, but also to support other humanitarian and medical activities which are so vital there.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. British citizen Ryan Cornelius has now been imprisoned in the UAE for 16 years. The UN in 2022 determined that it was arbitrarily detained, and the Deputy Foreign Secretary himself signed a letter before coming to his current position calling for his immediate release. On Saturday, Ryan turned 70 and his children have grown up without him. So please can the government update us on what they are doing to get him home and whether they will lodge a plea for clemency given his age and ill health.
I can assure my honourable friend that the FCDO ministers and officials continue to raise the cases of both Mr Cornelius and Mr Ridley with UAE authorities. We're urgently looking into this information provided by the family and seeking expert advice, and we'll follow up with the people concerned when we have more information.
Richard Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The proposed EU-UK Youth Mobility Scheme would have allowed 18 to 30-year-old UK citizens to work and study in the EU without barriers that this government's Brexit has created. Yet the Tories and the Labour Party immediately rebuffed the offer. What is the Secretary of State's message to young people across the UK watching opportunities being blocked by Westminster?
The EU scheme requires people between the ages of 18 and 35, I didn't realise you were still a young person at 35, to have absolutely free movement, which is obviously a discussion that's been had at length, both in the Chamber and also during the Brexit vote. What we do is have bilateral youth mobility schemes. We're more than happy to propose those with interested parties.
Sir William Cash.
On Gibraltar, the Minister has stated that our current EU negotiations are consistent with UK sovereignty. How will this be achieved? Firstly, as to defence and our RAF assets, and also any nuclear naval capability that the UK has in that region. And secondly, how will our sovereignty be guaranteed at the border if there is a Schengen border post on the soil of Gibraltar?
Well, my honourable friend can be assured that we will continue to safeguard the sovereignty of Gibraltar, which is much cherished. He can also be assured that in the negotiations we'll fully protect the operations and the independence of the UK's military facilities in Gibraltar, and I very much look forward to more fully discussing this in front of his committee tomorrow morning.
Hannah.
Thank you, Minister. Despite repeated claims by Saudi authorities that they've abolished the death penalty for children, child defendants are still regularly sentenced to death. Some 11 have been executed since 2015. Child defendants Abdullah al-Hawidi, Abdullah al-Darazi and Yusuf al-Manasif have all received death sentences for crimes allegedly committed before the age of 18. In April 2020, Saudi authorities issued a royal decree purporting to abolish the death penalty. This appears to be an empty promise. Will the Minister intervene and impress on them their human rights obligations?
We continue to engage with the Saudi authorities in this, and as she knows, we push back on death penalty being used in any country around the world.
So David Davis.
Will the Foreign Office and the Home Office abandon their ridiculous pseudo-security argument preventing the return of Shamima Begum and other women and children from northern Syria? Our allies oppose that policy because they know it risks turning those children into tomorrow's terrorists.
My right honourable friend, who knows a great deal about this matter, speaks with considerable authority on it, and I have no doubt that his voice will be heard in both the Foreign Office and the Home Office.
Andy Slaughter.
I thank the Speaker. Spain, Norway and Ireland are ready to recognise jointly Palestine as a state within weeks. 4 other European countries look like to follow suit, and France recently voted to admit Palestine as a full member of the UN. Isn't it time the UK government joined its European partners in recognising Palestine?
Well, as we've made clear, Mr. Speaker, recognition of a Palestinian state can't come at the beginning of the process, but it doesn't have to come at the end.
Tim Lawton.
The Deputy Foreign Secretary updated us about the state of our relations with Djibouti and his assessment of the impact of the UK recognising the MOU between Ethiopia and Somaliland about the development of the port of Berberis. And can I ask him if he has any plans to visit Djibouti, and if so, can I give him some advice?
Well, I'm very pleased to tell my honourable friend that I have visited Djibouti in the past without suffering the fate that I'm so sorry to see that he suffered. But as he knows, we are taking this matter up with the authorities in Djibouti.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel's deliberate and willful starvation of Gaza is a war crime, yet the government deflects on all questions on unrefunding by saying unrefunding runs to the end of April. We're here, it's the end of April, the last day in April, so if the government doesn't restore unrefunding, isn't the government aiding and abetting Israeli war crimes?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made very clear what the government's position is on UNRWA. We are in a process. That process will be completed, and once it's been completed, I will report to the House.
Dame Andrea Jenkins, final question.
Mr. Speaker, Ahmed Ali Alid, the Moroccan asylum seeker convicted last week of murdering 70-year-old Terence Carney, wandered through 13 European countries before entering the UK illegally and claiming asylum. Does the Minister agree with me that we must redouble our efforts working with international allies, and we do not want criminals like this in our country?
I understand her concerns. I'm not familiar with this particular case, but I'll follow up and get back to her. Thank you.